What's up, gangsters? How about some more of this tank silliness? That last episode was really supposed to be part of a longer episode, but it was just too long. No surprise there, right? So anyway, I decided to just cut that one off and make a third episode and make them both slightly less long. So let's go. The next thing I'm going to do is, make some welds. And I'm looking forward to that because, let's see. So, welds, it needs welds. Well, needs is pretty subjective, right? But anyway, the deal is there's a lot of stuff that was welded to the outside of the turret, for example. Not the hooks, those were cast in. But these brackets, this thing right here, they were welded on. They just have, needs a bead around there, and it was pretty visible. There were also welds along, here, let me get a pointer. There were welds along here because this whole thing here was cast. This is plate, and so there was a weld right there all along that joint, and then this thing here, the splashes for the fuel filler caps, those were cast and then welded on to this piece of plate. So yeah, weld beads there. Anyway, so in the past I have done weld beads using Aves epoxy sculpt or epoxy clay, and it's good, but god damn, that stuff is stiff and hard to work with. I mean, it's just the worst. And so I decided to try something different because I can't get any of the nice soft looking Tamiya stuff that Uncle Nightshift uses in his videos. So I decided I'm gonna try this. Because it's a stick, it's got the two parts. It's got, yeah. I don't know how this is going to work. Yeah, anyway, it's two parts, and you slice off a chunk. Like that, and it already has the A and the B part right there together, and so you just mush it together and work it around until you have it evenly blended, and then off you go, and it cures sometime later. I don't know how long, probably. Does it even say? I don't know. Anyway, this is basically the same shit that Tamiya sells you, and I got it at the hardware for like $7, and it's way more obviously than what you get from any of the branded companies. And let's see here, fix it, yeah, blah 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 blah. Okay, hard as steel in 15 to 20 minutes, maybe sanded, filed, painted, or drilled. So I'll have to work relatively quickly, but that's okay, no big deal. You get about an hour with epoxy sculpt. I don't know how long the Tamiya stuff is, but anyway, we'll see how it works. We'll come back and take a look after I've done a little bit of it. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, I don't even remember. It's been like a week. And I don't remember what I was talking about last, but it seems like I was about to do some welds, and I had bought this stuff to try. Yeah, it was a fail. That's the sound of it going in the trash can because I just don't need it. It was just too stiff to roll into little tiny noodles for welds. So I went back to the old standby, the Aves epoxy clay. And I instantly realized that the last time I made any welds with that stuff, that they were quite a bit bigger because making them as tiny, making the noodles, again, as tiny as they needed to be for 1/48 scale, just was a fail. Either because I just suck or what, I don't know, but it did not go as I needed it to. So I got into a different. I went for another sort of traditional thing, which was to stretch sprue and then use extra thin to soften it and emboss the weld pattern with this angled piece of tubing. And that works fine. It's just a little messy and it takes a little while, because what I found is that once you this does not readily conform to tight curves. You can pre-bend it. I mean, that helps. But what I found worked best was to glue it to the model, let that set, and then come back and soften it again, and then work on the texture. And that worked okay. I mean, I'm happy with these welds. You can see in there how they look, and I think that they're pretty authentic for a big, heavy, ugly weld like was pretty common on these things. But it's also important to point out that this is also a little bit of stage makeup for two reasons. One is that, again, at scale, if the weld is at all competently done, you're not going to see the scalloping. It's going to be mostly buried, or just a very shallow relief, and it's just not going to show it at 48 times smaller. And so what Tamiya has done, where they've created the welds in areas like that, is really probably the most realistic. But again, this is stage makeup, where you're trying to tell a story, and sometimes you kind of have to over dramatize it. The other reason is that these welds, very often in cases like this, were not one giant bead that was made using the standard weld motion. If you're not a welder, you won't know this, but typically what happens is when you're welding, you will strike an arc with the welding rod. Get a piece of paper here so I can draw. You strike an arc with the welding rod, and once you've got the arc going, you get a puddle. And then you're doing this. You're working that puddle and moving laterally as you go, and that's what creates that scalloped pattern. But even if you have a pretty large welding rod, and most welding rods, like for normal, like farm use, a welding rod is going to be like an 1/8 inch rod. A 1/4 inch rod is pretty big, and a 1/2 inch rod is enormous. And you're pretty much only going to find that in the kind of heavy industrial applications like this. But even at that, it's pretty uncommon on these, from what I've seen anyway, on these tanks, to see a single bead pass, which is what you get with this. Rather, instead, you get multiple passes that run next to each other. And so it ends up looking like a series of sort of long beads rather than one pass that's got real obvious scalloping. Like that's what you see in reference photos when you look at the welds around the lifting eyes, for example. And so I chose to just approximate those with a bunch of black super glue. But again, stage makeup. So, all right, now I was like, yeah, okay, I don't know that I love that method the most. So then I thought, what if I used lead wire? Lead wire embosses and pretty easily. I could just glue it in the joint there and then come back and emboss it. And that was a pretty good theory, because that is all pretty much true. It was a little harder than expected for a couple of reasons. One, the lead wire was just less receptive to the embossing tool than I expected it to be. The other, which was way more frustrating, is that I had a hard time keeping it stuck to the model. It just didn't want to stay stuck. These corners are not really sharp corners. They are kind of round corners. And even with plenty of black super glue in there, just the pressure of the embossing tool was frequently enough to just pop that lead wire right out of there. But I eventually wrestled it around and I got it done. And I think it looks pretty good. And I was like feeling pretty clever that I had thought of this until the sammed wire. I showed him. I was like, hey man, check this out. He's like, oh yeah, that's a pretty cool technique. It's a great workaround. I mean, he pretty quickly disabused me of any notion that I had come up with this independently on my own and that it was going to be a revolution in tank modeling. But nonetheless, I felt proud that I thought of it by myself, original or not. And there's the one on that thing. I went back to the stretched sprue on these things because they are in fact just pieces of angle iron that are welded to the back side of the turret. So anyway, I think that's all done. And I was chomping at the bit to add all of the handles and light guards. And then I realized that the process of putting the tracks together might involve a lot of wrestling, and that could be bad for tiny, delicate resin details. So I think very wisely I chose to hold off because I still had to do the tracks. And while I waited for my box from Sprue Brothers to arrive with the other kit and the replacement tracks, I went ahead and did this one. And it was, it wasn't too bad. I was a little terrified, but it wasn't too bad. Honestly, the hardest thing was just getting happy with the joint at the end, getting it positioned so that when I do it permanently that it looks good. And as you can see, some of the individual links, I just wasn't super stoked with those. And I may come back and loosen those up and try to make them look a little bit better. I don't know. But, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And the joint is right there. And I've got it temporarily tacked with super glue. But, overall, it wasn't too bad. My first bit of terror, however, happened when I realized that, I was going to just take this top run and poke it in here from the side. Yeah, that doesn't work. There's a reason why the instructions have you put the hull on after you've fitted the tracks, because this track length does not go between this mud flap fender thing and the wheels. I was terrified until I realized that even though all of these wheels are firmly glued in place, the fact that this sprocket rotates made it all pretty easy because I just was able to just feed this end of the track in from the front and just use this sprocket to guide it in there. Getting it out, we're about to find out how difficult that's going to be, because now they're, obviously in a track shape, and that may be a little more difficult, but this whole thing is pretty flexible. So we'll see what happens. The other thing that I discovered was key is there is a little there's an alignment pin and a knot and a matching notch in the track on the back wheel right here, this idler wheel. You can see it here in the instructions right there. That's important. That will help you a lot. It was a little difficult for me to get the track hooked to it, but if I hadn't been able to do that, this would have all been a lot harder. The other thing that was difficult, and you can see I ended up using tape and toothpicks, was getting it to stay put back here. But this little wedge that I had in my drawer was great for that. One question that somebody asked me was, how long did you let the glue set up before you did this? Honestly, it was like 5 or 10 minutes, so it wasn't bad. I didn't have any trouble keeping them together. They did not want to come apart, so that was all pretty good. Now, though, let's see. Okay, there we go. My little super glue tack just popped loose, basically with me doing nothing more than thinking about it. But now let's see. How are we going to get this off of here?
It better be flexible, because that's the only way it's going to happen. Yeah, there we go. So now we're doing that and getting it unhooked. Yeah, this is going to be a little, this defies some physics. It's a good thing that this stuff is not all rigid, because, yeah, with this wheel, with this all, glued on here, well, not glued on here, but, glued and stuck to the track, to the sprocket teeth, I mean, it can't really turn. Of course, there could also be some super glue under there, because I was working on this track. So, yeah, I don't know, we'll see. I may be sitting here for a few minutes fussing with this to get it off. Yeah, I think that maybe what's happened here is that they may be a little more stuck to this sprocket than I want them to be. May have to actually take this sprocket off to get this done. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, this could be a real disaster. We'll see. I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, these are not, exactly flexible anymore. They're glued into position, so rotating the sprocket, yeah, kind of a non-starter, and I may have to get a little bit medieval.
Yeah, there we go. That was part of the problem, is there was a little bit of super glue in there, but now, there we go. Yay! So, sweet. I think that is proof that technique works, and now I have got a set of tracks that I can paint and weather to my heart's content, and I'll do the other ones the same way. One thing to note is you've got ejector pin marks on the inside there that they're pretty shallow, but they have to be filled. They're just going to show otherwise. So for that, I used my standard goopy old ALC 309 lacquer primer, because you can just brush it in there, give it a few minutes. It shrinks down quite a bit, but you can tell pretty quickly if you've got enough in there, and if you don't, you go back and add some more. So that works good. Okay, well, so yeah, this thing, between the track issue and, well, really, it is just all about the track issue. This thing is starting to feel snake bit. I may have mentioned the other day when I was filming that I had ordered a replacement kit to deal with the melted tracks. Well, so I went on Sprue Brothers and I selected the one that had the picture that matched the one that I already had. And yeah, I did notice that there was more than one of these. If you go here and do Tamiya 1/48, oops, Tamiya 1/48, Sherman see, there's 2 of them. And yeah, I just grabbed one, not paying attention, not actually looking at the description. I read Tamiya M4 Sherman early, and I thought that was kind of weird, but I don't know shit about tanks, so I just picked that one. And as I'm sure you knowledgeable tank guys have already surmised and are laughing about, I got, yes, exactly what I actually ordered, not what I thought I was ordering, and yeah, that not gonna work. Not gonna work. Early production, yep, totally wrong, not gonna work. So, yeah, I have to wait for another one to show up, and that won't be till next week. And that means that officially there is no way I am going to get done with this damn you Lentz build by the end of December. So, yeah, whatever, it is what it is. I don't like being on arbitrary deadlines anyway. And that gives me more time to work on the shit that's fun, like adding stowage. You might have noticed the other day that I had this little piece of channel that I had cut to go here. This seems to be a pretty common thing, although wood is more common, but you know, for the guys to make a little shelf to put stuff on. And I have printed myself some spare road wheels and a little chunk of track. Now, if you're sharp-eyed also, you may be like, wait a minute, that is not the same track. That is not a T66 track. It is actually more like a T54 track, and you would not be wrong. This is one of those files that I grabbed from the 3D48 group, and it said, I think, T62, and I didn't really care because I kind of didn't want it to be the same as the track that's on there, because as I've discussed, the T66 track was actually pretty rare. It was not popular. It did not do good on snow and ice. That's one thing I've learned. And so they quit using them pretty quickly, and so not a lot of the Easy 8s had them to begin with, and most of them got replaced with the later T80 or T84s. But point being is that not only would it not been likely that they would have had some extra T lengths of T66 track laying around to use as, you know, bits of extra armor or whatever, but it would have been more likely that they would have just grabbed it from a tank that was disabled. And so these are from an earlier style Sherman. So anyway, that's that. The other thing that I'm working on is, let's see, I got some chain here. I'd like to have a little pile of tow chain on there. This chain is a little big. It's like representative of like a 4-inch chain, which is pretty heavy, but I think chains look cool. So I'm gonna probably use that. I've been actually working on trying to 3D print some chain. This is 3-inch chain at scale. And it's kind of a printing, just almost a printing challenge, just to see if I can do it. Because you can see it's pretty delicate, but let's compare it to what would be to this other piece of chain, size-wise. Okay, maybe that's a little too big. That's more like, because that'd be more like a 6-inch chain, like a like a boat anchor chain. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't use that. I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, printing chain is a challenge, and I'd like to figure out how to do it. The other thing I want to do is replace the tow cable that goes across here with some actual cable, because that string that's in the kit is not my favorite. So I got this roll of unruly stuff. This is braided stainless steel cable. It's the real deal. But just like the real deal, it is also extremely springy. I see sometimes people, and even though I don't know about tanks, I do know enough about tow cables because it's a farm thing. These things are stiff and springy, and this is 0.6 millimeter, which scales to about a 1-inch tow cable. That is not flexible. I see sometimes people will put these cables that are made out of copper or whatever on their tank model, and they'll have it laying around all casually like it's rope or something. Yeah, no. These tow cables are extremely stiff and hard to manage. You don't coil them up. You don't fold them up. You don't really bend them. Yeah, it's just not a thing. So this is very true to life. And as you can see, it's already tried to come from together on this roll. And hopefully I've got it corralled. But anyway, that's what I'm going to try to do. And I'm just going to carry on with that. And whenever I get the new kit with the new track, then I'll keep going, I guess. Anyway, that's it. I'm over it for today. Okay, so it's a couple of days later, and I did in fact get the replacement kit from Sprue Brothers, and they were super cool about it, as expected. And so I've got those bits of the tracks that are not melted ready to go. And so I'll be putting those together and adding them on soon. I also went ahead and finished assembling the turret because I felt like I could move on with that. You'll notice that I think this is called the pintle for the machine gun, for the Ma-Deuce, is brass tubing. Not because I'm trying to be fancy, but because I'm an idiot and I lost the one from the kit. So there's that. The other thing that I've got done that I'm pretty stoked about is, I think that I talked about the cable, the tow cable, in the previous episode. I'm kind of losing track of what I have and haven't talked about, but at any rate, I've been working with that and I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. I've got it shaped pretty well, and I've got my 3D printed replacements for the kit parts. And you can see, let's see, yeah, here they are. I think maybe I showed these before, but anyway, I mean, they're not terrible from the kit, but you just get the two, and that one where it's depicting the cable end being in the clamp right there, how it's it's molded in like that in the eye of the cable end. That's not so great. So I wanted to make my own, and so I've done that, and you can see that the replacement for that particular one that I was just talking about is right there on the back. And that one was a little bit tricky because that's actually 3 pieces counting the cable end itself. So this is what the cable ends look like from the print, as you would expect. Just whoops, like that. And it's got, I printed them standing straight up, and it's got a 0.8 millimeter hole in it. Well, it's supposed to. This one doesn't seem to. Anyway, I printed them standing straight up like that. And the 0.8 millimeter hole, by the time you account for the sort of vagaries of 3D printing, was perfect for the 0.6 millimeter cable to slip into. The other one on the front, where it's depicted with the end in the clamp, is printed like that, also standing straight up. Come on, focus up there. Also standing straight up. You can see what the supports are like. That worked pretty good. These were printed. I printed these at 20 microns. There you can see the hole for the cable. But the thing that was tricky about this one on the back, obviously, if I want to get the end of the cable eye into the clamp, well, I got to be able to open the clamp up in some way. So what I did is I created that shackle in 2 parts, and it's a lot easier to show you here on the Fusion 360 model than it is on the actual parts because they are tiny as fleas. But here it is, and you can see that it is two parts, the red and the green, and if I turn off the top of the shackle, you can see now I have just this open thing, and I'm able to basically just lay the eye of the cable end on there, and then set this part back on top of it, and with some careful gluing I end up with a closed shackle that's got the cable end eye in there, and it's still loose and will move around just like the real thing. So I'm pretty stoked about the way that turned out. I also wanted to make it pretty easy to assemble. So with all these things, you'll notice that there's this peg on the bottom of it, and that's basically just set up so that all I have to do is drill a 1 or a 1.1 millimeter hole in the model, then drop this in there, put a little super glue on, and it's good to go. So yeah, definitely a little bit of micro engineering, but I like the way it turned out. One thing about this this stainless steel cable, it works pretty good. But if you've ever tried to cut wire rope with regular side cutters, you know that it does not work all that great because they tend to just mash the cable, and then the end of it is deformed and won't go into a hole that's a pretty close fit, like I have on the ends of on the cable ends. So Xuron 9180 photo etch shears work really good. Chop it right off, and you get a nice clean cut without much, if any, deformation. So it's a good little tip if you are working with wire rope like this to make your own tow cables. Okay, so that's most of that. The other thing that I did that I'm pretty stoked about, even though it's a little bit silly, is my chain. In the previous clip, I think I was debating about whether or not to use this metal chain because it's a little bit large, and it is a little bit large, but it's not offensively large. It doesn't look too bad. But the thing I'm really stoked about is my hooks. That was a pretty significant design challenge. The shape of those hooks is complex. It's one of those things that looks really simple, but when you start trying to make a mathematically defined surface like that, it's not so easy. So I was pretty happy about that I got it done and printed, and I was able to split the link and actually put it through the clevis and make it where it actually works and looks natural. So pretty stoked about that. So I think really this is about everything as far as all of the bits and pieces that need to get added onto this before I can call all of this part of it good. But one thing I do still have to deal with is the 50 cal. It's just not great, and I have a replacement that I'm going to 3D print that I got from an unnamed source that was very generous and has beautifully designed one, and so I'm going to do that as well. That reminds me, from the same said source, I have jerry cans. I don't think I mentioned those before. These are absolutely wonderful. Itty bitty 1/48 scale jerry cans. You can even see on the other side, it's kind of hard to see, but it's got lettering stamped into it. Really hard to see, but the important part is the handles and the cap. Look at how good that looks. Those are pretty cool. I think I'm going to just have a bunch of these back here on this cargo carrier and just keep it simple. I have ordered some of the lovely value gear storage that Steve Munsell makes, and I'm going to look at putting some of that here on the deck, some junk on the trunk, but that hasn't come in yet, so we'll see that in the next episode. But speaking of cool stuff made by other people, I'll just take this opportunity to show you. I got a neat package. This is stuff that I will use mostly on this project from Tom Annis at Annis. These little brushes are great. I love these for certain kinds of detail painting. I say certain kinds because these brushes have a what I guess you would call a constant diameter tip. So if you look, this is one that I've put some miles on. You can see that all of the bristles are the same length. And so it works really well in situations where what you're actually trying to do is wick some paint into an area, as opposed to actually painting a tiny detail like you would with this type of belly, like is on that, where it comes to a point. So different uses for different brushes, of course, but I really like these ones that Tom makes. He also sent me a pair of these new tweezers that he's offering. These things are super cool. They have got an extremely sharp tip, so I will probably be keeping the protector on them because, yeah, I'll drop that on the floor once and it's over. So these will be reserved for special tasks, but they really are nice. I just love the way that Tom details his stuff. I mean, his product design is really unsurpassed in the model making space. Just look at the finish on these. They're really beautiful. His packaging is really first class. This is the little box that they came in. I mean, it's just nice. Just looks very high end. Very, very pro. He sent me these little cotton swabs that he makes. These things are great. Anytime you need a really, really tiny Q-tip, they are, in fact, precision Q-tips. They work great. And these I will not be using on this project, I don't imagine, but they are still amazingly cool. These sort of universal seatbelt buckles in 1/48 and 1/32, so that you can, use like the edge of a dollar bill, if you're in the United States, I suppose, or masking tape or whatever you want to create the actual belts, and then just use this sort of universal hardware for all the buckles. These things are just another example of how Tom innovates with little details that we all love, because he's a model maker himself, and he, whenever he finds something that he wants, he makes a product. So these are great. Okay, so there you go. This little tank thing is moving along, slowly. I mean, I'm definitely not making my December the 1st sort of milestone to start painting it, and it's pretty clear that at this point I'm not going to finish the thing by December 31st, so yeah, whatever, but it's still fun and still cool, and hopefully next time you see it in episode 4, I will have everything primed and it'll be time to start actually throwing down some colors. So stay tuned, and as always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.